When we talk about Pablo Escobar, the cultural narrative almost always defaults to the violence. We talk about the car bombs, the assassinations, and the sicarios on motorcycles, but focusing exclusively on the violence misses the structural genius of the man. Violence was merely a tool. The true terrifying reality of Pablo Escobar, and the reason he became the wealthiest criminal in human history, was logistical. He was the Henry Ford of cocaine. Before Escobar, the cocaine trade was a disorganized, artisanal cottage industry. Mules would carry a few kilograms in false bottom suitcases on commercial flights. It was high risk and incredibly low volume. Escobar looked at the inefficient system and applied cold industrial logic to it. He realized that the profit margin on cocaine was the highest of any commodity in the history of global commerce. A kilogram of refined cocaine that cost perhaps $1,000 to produce in a jungle lab in Colombia could be sold wholesale in Miami for $50,000 to $60,000. That's a $5,000 markup. But to realize those astronomical returns, you have to solve the problem of volume. You cannot get billionaire rich moving kilos in suitcases. You have to move metric tons. And to move tons, you need an air force. This is part one of the Pablo Escobar saga, the industrialization of the Narcocratic State. To understand the trajectory of El Patron, we have to examine the socio-economic crucible that forged him. Escobar was born in Rionegro, Antigua, in 1949. The myth often portrays him as rising from the absolute gutter, but his family was actually modest working class. His father was a farmer, his mother a schoolteacher. However, he grew up in a society defined by La Violencia, a horrific, decade-long war that effectively dissolved the rule of law in the Colombian countryside. He matured in a world where authority was not absolute. It was negotiated through brutality. His early criminal career is a masterclass in calculated escalation. He didn't start with drugs. He started with the desecration of the dead. Local legends claim he stole headstones from cemeteries, sandblasted the names off, and resold them. Whether apocryphal or entirely true, it establishes his willingness to violate the ultimate societal taboos for a profit. He graduated to smuggling Marlboro cigarettes and contraband household appliances. This was his university. Smuggling cigarettes taught him the hidden routes through the Andes. It taught him the exact piece and price of customs officials. From there, he moved to kidnapping executives and stealing cars. By the mid-1970s, he had capital, a dedicated crew, and a vast network of corrupt officials. The absolute pivotal moment came in Escobar's methodology, occurring in 1976. He was arrested for trafficking 39 kilograms of cocaine hidden in the spare tire of a truck. This arrest is the genesis of the famous Plato o Plomo, silver or lead doctrine. When he was caught, he initially tried to bribe the judges. When the bribery failed to secure a quiet release, he didn't hire a better defense attorney. He hired hitmen. The arresting officers were systematically assassinated. The physical case files mysteriously vanished from the courthouse. Without evidence or witnesses, the case collapsed and Escobar walked free. This established the foundational precedent of the Medellin cartel. The law does not apply to Pablo Escobar because Pablo Escobar can either buy the law with silver or kill the law with lead. With the localized legal obstacles permanently removed, he turned his full intellectual capacity towards the industrialization of the trade. He needed a supply chain that could feed the insatiable, exploding demand for cocaine in the United States. The engine that generated Medellin cartel's billions was known as the air bridge. This was a logistical pipeline that seamlessly connected the processing labs in the Colombian rainforest directly to the streets of Miami. The scale is almost incomprehensible for a criminal enterprise. At its operational peak, the cartel was moving 70 to 80 tons of cocaine per month. That is 80,000 kilograms every 30 days. To move that much physical product, you cannot rely on luck or commercial flights. You need dedicated infrastructure. The central hub of this infrastructure was Norman's Cay. Norman's Cay is a small, idyllic island in the Exumas chain of the Bahamas, located just 210 miles off the coast of Florida. Carlos Letter, a logistical savant working for the cartel, effectively annexed the sovereign island. He bought off the Bahamian government, chased away the local residents, and expanded the airstrip to 3,300 feet to accommodate heavy cargo planes. He installed military-grade radar and deployed a security force armed with automatic weapons. Norman's Cay ceased to be a vacation destination. It became the world's most lucrative transshipment hub. The hub-and-spoke model, operated out of Norman's Cay, was brilliant. Heavy transport aircraft like the Curtiss C-46 Commando or Douglas DC-9 would fly the long haul from Colombia to the Bahamas. These massive planes were essentially flying fuel tankers filled with cocaine. Once they landed at Norman's Cay, the product was offloaded into refrigerated warehouses to prevent the cocaine from degrading in tropical heat. Then mosquito fleets of smaller agile aircraft, like the Piper Super Cub, would load up 500 to 800 kilos and make the short, low-altitude hop to Florida. They flew under the radar, landing on improvised grass strips in the Everglades, or dropping waterproof bales directly in the ocean for speedboats to retrieve. This maximized efficiency and minimized the risk to the valuable heavy aircraft. The revenue generated by this massive machine was staggering. The cartel was pulling an estimated $420 million per week. The cash flow was so immense, it created a physical storage crisis. The banking system literally couldn't launder it fast enough. They stacked it in warehouses, buried it in farming fields, and hid it inside the walls of suburban houses. This led to a bizarre problem. Spoilage. The cartel's chief accountant, Pablo's brother Roberto, noted they wrote off 10% of their annual revenue, roughly $2.1 billion, simply because rats would eat the bills, water would rot them, or they'd be lost to the elements. They were also spending $2,500 every single month just on the rubber bands needed to bundle the stacks of $100 bills. The unimaginable crushing wealth allowed Escobar to build his own physical kingdom, Hacienda Napoli, located in Puerto Triunfo. This sprawling estate covered 20 square kilometers. It wasn't just a mansion, it was a sovereign microstate. The entrance gate was marked by a blue and white archway topped with a real aircraft, a replica of the Piper Super Cub, tail number HK617P, that successfully flew his very first shipment. It was a brazen, arrogant statement. He wasn't hiding his criminality, he was mounting it as a trophy. Inside the gates, he built a private zoo. He illegally imported elephants, giraffes, zebras, and rhinoceroses from Africa and the US. He built massive concrete dinosaurs for his son to play on. And most famously, he imported 4 hippopotamuses. This ecological vanity project has had lasting, devastating consequences for Colombia. After Escobar's empire fell, the hippos were left feral. They thrived in the Magdalena River basin, mutating into invasive species of over 100 cocaine hippos that currently terrorize local fishermen and destroy the native ecosystem. They are a living, breathing, biological legacy of the cartel's absolute hubris. But the infinite money and a fleet of airplanes were not enough to protect him from the eventual wrath of the Colombian state. Escobar knew he needed a shield. He found it in the desperate slums of Medellin. In the 1980s, the comunas, the hillside shanty towns, were entirely neglected by the government. There was no sanitation, no electricity, and no schools. The people were invisible to the political elite in Bogota. Escobar saw his socio-political vacuum and stepped directly into it. He launched a massive philanthropic program called Medellin Without Slums. The centerpiece of this initiative was the construction of a brand new neighborhood built directly on top of the Moravia garbage dump, where people had literally been living on top of trash. Escobar built 500 solid brick houses. He installed sanitation. He didn't ask for mortgage or rent. He gave the homes away. Furthermore, he built over 100 soccer fields in the poorest neighborhoods, outfitting them with massive floodlights. This allowed the community to play and socialize at night, reclaiming the dark hours from local street gangs. The philanthropy was not charity. It was a highly tactical, calculated investment. The people of the slums, the shirtless ones, became his private, fiercely loyal army. They became his early warning system. If a police unit entered a comuna, Escobar knew about it instantly because a kid on a bike or a grandmother selling food would immediately call his operators. When the government eventually tried to raid his properties, the people of the barrio Pablo Escobar would riot. They would swarm the streets, creating a literal human shield that made tactical police operations impossible without committing a massacre. Escobar had successfully purchased the soul of a city with brick, mortar, and drug money. He used the massive popular support to launch a political career, eventually getting elected as an alternate member of the Colombian Congress. He walked in the halls of power wearing a tie, believing his money had washed away his sins and bought him a seat at the table of the elite. But the elite were about to push back, exposing his criminal past and humiliating him on the national stage. And when Pablo Escobar was humiliated, the industrialist vanished and the monster awoke. All right, we've reached the end of part 1, and before I sign off, it's time for final thoughts. When we look at the rise of the Medellin cartel, it is incredibly easy to get swept up in the Hollywood glamour of the story. The private zoos, the airplanes, the billions of dollars buried in the dirt, the sheer audacity of spending thousands of dollars a month just on rubber bands. It sounds like a movie, but underneath that staggering wealth is a terrifying lesson about the mechanics of the state and what happens when a government fails its own people. Pablo Escobar did not build his human shield by forcing people at gunpoint to protect him. He built it by providing the exact things the Colombian government refused to provide: housing, sanitation, and most importantly, dignity. When you have an entire population living on a literal garbage dump, ignored by the politicians in the capital, they don't care where the money comes from to build the house. They only care that the house gets built. Escobar proves that nature abhors a vacuum. When a legitimate government abdicates its responsibilities to care for its poorest citizens, a shadow government will inevitably rise to fill that void. Escobar bought the loyalty of hundreds of thousands of people, not because he was a good man, but because the bar set by the state was so abysmally low. He weaponized poverty. He turned desperate citizens into pawns on his chessboard. The most dangerous thing about a criminal with billions of dollars isn't the guns he carries, it's the infrastructure he can build. Because once a criminal organization becomes the primary provider of social services, uprooting them requires going to war with the very people you are supposed to be protecting. Join me next time for part 2, where the political ambitions fail and Escobar turns his billions towards absolute terror. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.